there's the question dealing with or about the role of opening portals. And what does that mean? Is there such a thing as beings inhabiting other beings? In Western culture, we have Judeo-Christian culture, we have the whole concept or understanding that there is a situation where exorcism happens, where people pull out, extricate, or through spiritual or religious interventions of the sort, to get some evil being out of a person. Is there such a thing in Buddhism? In this modern age where people, for the longest time in my life, especially in certain circles like academia and scientifically minded circles, that has usually been, if not always, looked down upon as folk tales or backward way of thinking, totally not based on reality. It's just to increase the role of fear and blind faith, etc., etc. When you ask me as a bhikkhu, or specifically within this tradition of Buddhism, Theravada tradition, and I think this happens to be one of the things that you can see it all across the board in all of the areas of different denominations of Buddhism across the centuries, traditions, that yes, there is in Buddhism. We find evidence of this in the suttas, in the discourses, where you have instances, mentions of beings inhabiting other beings. Now, the tendency is, when we hear something like this, automatically it's very mystical, it's so esoteric, it's so out of this world of time and space and the four-dimensional world we live in, into discussing or touching upon a world that we find to be inaccessible, untangible, intangible to us. Therefore, we are vulnerable to him. So we don't like that. We don't like being not in control of things. In that sense, many people can come up with different ways of brushing off an idea, a theory, a principle, a concept, a teaching, you name it. Underneath it all, there's that fear of feeling weak or being weak or completely not in control of such a situation. What do you do? In the ancient times, human beings came up with animism and or attributing invisible roles to invisible phenomena, such as phenomena not so invisible, like lightning and wind and things like that, earthquakes, good harvest. For good harvest, you needed good rain, all these things. So people started to really somewhat try to pray, hopefully to try to intervene by some means to make the situation they were in be productive, to their advantage. So they came up with the various different hierarchies of gods or forces in nature, etc., etc. Everything was like, you have to do this ritual to get that, you have to do that ritual to get this. But it's ironic because today, even though the last 100, 150 years, the scientific community, which is not truly scientific, in fact, it's just whoever has been in control of the main narrative, they've been removing us from some aspects of our past, which means based on experience, by explaining things away wholesale. You have this with Nietzsche, you have this with, of course, Sigmund Freud, and they're just two names out of so many who threw the baby with the bathwater, caused this to happen, where anybody who comes up with an alternative way of explaining this phenomena that science, modern science, does not have the means to explain. So they do what they did in the old days in the caves, where they attributed some entity, some force to a phenomena that they couldn't understand. So ironically, today's pseudoscientists are bringing in the name science, or in this case, calling something non-scientific to explain something away, just like those ancient people living in caves called the dark something, menacing, so they couldn't go outside at night, or be careful of this or that, there's the boogeyman or something like that. Today's modern, so-called educated, advanced, whatever, academicians are doing the same thing. Putting the label of, oh, this is non-scientific, explaining it away. Explaining it away. But they can't. If it's true, if it's really happening, it is there. Whether I agree to it, that it's there or not, it's, gravity is there. So, and no, DSM doesn't cover those. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that APA came up with, which increasingly, exponentially has increased in thickness with a slew of nonsensical diagnoses they come up with based on the influence that the pharmaceutical companies employ by the amount of money that they pour into this APA and all those groups of people to come up with the most ridiculous diagnoses for people to explain these different phenomena away. So one has to pause and look, take a step back and look at the bigger picture, always. And if something doesn't make sense, for us to go ahead and squeeze our own theory in there to kind of make it make sense, that's wrong. That's not scientific. That's not real. That's not existentially valid. Now, having said that, the human mind, the human brain can come up with many different ways of attributing different things to different sets of experiences, emotional states, etc. If a person was depressed, people have been very quick to judge, to come up with their own conclusions, their own quote-unquote diagnoses to explain it away. This is not about that. When we talk about the phenomena of beings inhabiting other beings, this is not about that. This is about the fact that it does exist. However, something else also exists. and that is, I'm making a reference to one's control over the situation. So this is not a matter of the person not having control. Here the control is the person's willful, intentional participation in the choosing of making the right behavioral choices in one's life. Specifically, their conduct, their behavior. This is extremely important in Buddhism. This one in Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism specifically, the earliest tradition that we have, meaning the earliest teachings of the Buddha. The other traditions also have this, but I'm not going to talk for them. I'm talking about from the position of the Buddha's teachings that we see in the Pali texts, which are the earliest, where we do see these encounters, these events that I mentioned, that yes, they do occur. Cases where another being, which we call yakka, in the suttas they're called yakka. Yakka can be a spirit, can be a being, not a human being for sure, but these are not good in this case. Yakkas can also be wonderful because there are many different ranges. Just like human beings, you find good human beings, you have terrible sadistic human beings. To this day, in this world, you probably know a few of them in your life. And then you might find people that are so saintly, so loving, so pure. So the range, the gradient is quite vast spectrum. So similarly with yakkas, there are some that are on the lower spectrum. And not just yakkas, there are other beings as well, because in Buddhism we have 31 layers of existence. So we happen to be on the fifth rung of those 31 realms. Now, these beings get attracted to us when there is a complete disregard of decency, complete disregard of safety for yourself and others. That means if you're a person who always tends to cause harm to yourself, cut yourself, destroy your body. Like I've seen pictures of people who go and tattoo their whole bodies or faces, or continuously smoke, chain smokers. I'm not talking about even 3 packs a day, maybe even more. I don't know how they can do the math of that, but there are people who continuously smoke, do drugs, or do alcohol and other addictions. The more you are opening yourself to such destructive ways of living, you have basically told yourself, nature, existence, that you don't care. You don't care. So it's like a house that doesn't have a door, that doesn't have a window, or any windows, or if it does have a door, but it's off the hinges. There's definitely no padlock, there's definitely no door handle. And if you have windows, they're completely open, they're not opaque, there's no drapes covering what's, to keep that privacy. You don't have a front yard, you don't have a fence. It's in the middle of the street. And it's wide open. What you're saying to the world is, this house is actually not even mine. You can just waltz in here, you can take whatever you want, you can come in and you can inhabit this. To give you an analogy or something similar in real life, in my travels, I'm sure you've seen this as well in your lives, I've seen, especially in Western countries and Europe as well, they have these tiny little cubicles or almost like porta potties, but people would walk in to use their bathrooms for public usage, but they're freely available. and you don't want to walk into them because they're so smelly, they're so ugly. People have tossed things in there. It's like a junkyard. It's worse than that. But they have graffiti all over. They've destroyed furniture. They've destroyed mirrors. To the point where people put chains and things on things like toilet paper and other things. And they've removed towels. They've removed napkins. The authorities. And you can tell that there's this dilemma as to should we keep this functioning or should we not? Because people are destroying this. They don't treat it with respect. There's no cleanliness. There's no consideration. So when you live your life destructively, without having any regard for yourself, you are telling the rest of the universe, and especially the non-visible beings, and believe me, there are more non-visible beings than visible ones. Okay? Know that. That's a fact. Even, in the physical realm, things that your eyes cannot see or detect. Have you ever looked at a, petri dish with a microscope? You'd be surprised. Just take a swab of your own saliva, put it on an agar and on a petri dish, and slide it under a microscope. You will be hopefully surprised that there are these beings in you, and that's only a tiny little part of what's really there, which you cannot see. But that's still belonging to the physical realm, by the way, huh? So it's enormously vast existence. So if you change, however, your attitude towards yourself, and I haven't mentioned about the world around you, one might, for example, be very considerate of their health, their well-being. They have a very good hygiene of their own body. They read the right books. They want to be at optimal, performance level. They want to make very good money. They want to be at the top of their game and, be successful, this and that, but at the cost of other things. Such as in this area of their life, they're very successful, but over there they break sila. They don't have virtue in themselves, in life, in how they treat others. They treat themselves well. So again, we're back to square one. There's no virtue. And that is what I want you to think about in terms of portals that I mentioned. Portals are opened when you open yourself to them. They're always open, in a sense. But what is required from us is to maintain restraint, to keep the doors locked. That house, you need to secure. The windows have to be secured. The doors have to have locks on them. Otherwise, anybody can walk in. Okay? You don't believe me? Go ahead. Keep your mouth open when you're sleeping or when you're just during the day. Keep your mouth completely open. Breathe through your mouth. Or keep your eyes open. Try resisting your eyelashes, your eyelids closing. You know what will happen. You're going to get sick. Your eyes are going to get dry, first of all. You're going to get things running into it. Your eyelashes are protective. Your eyelids are protecting your eyes from things that are flying in the air. You're very sensitive to that. Similarly with the mouth. So we close the mouth. I think it was the Middle Ages, in parts of Europe, you probably have seen in old movies or even animations, where you find Renaissance time, where men and women used to wear caps as they went to bed. Nightcap, and it would have these leash-like things that come down from the cap, and we didn't ever think about those. We think, oh, they're just protecting their head. It's too cold. No, they would wear them in all the seasons throughout the year. Well, apparently they found out that, in fact, those are straps that tie your jaw, your chin, basically, from opening up at night, forcing you to breathe through your nose, because people were noticing that they were inviting other creatures, organisms, to crawl into them. So it's kind of nightmarish for many people. You wake up with something's wrong. You feel there's something wrong. And a spider went in there or something. Or mice would go in there. Yes, these are, we don't think about them today. So the people were closing their mouth to make sure that they're closed. Why? Because it was becoming a portal for other things to go in. When you're scratched or when you have a nasty scab, you injure yourself and you're bleeding, what do? You put a Band-Aid, you cover it up with some protection ointment, you cover it up. Why? Because there's beings. You don't want it to be infected. A person who's living an unethical life is leaving themselves open for infection. Okay? Now, that is, referring to it in medical terms, right? Infection. But that's nothing compared to the infection of one's internal spiritual world. And what we're having is, for the last several years, not just the last 4, 6, 8 years, but gradually over the last 6 or 7 decades, if not more, human beings have been corralled away from living righteous, in this case, virtuous lives. The role of ethical living has been downplayed to such a point, to such a level, that it's not important anymore. A child does not hear about right and wrong. Minimization of these values ensures that the person is always open to outside influences. And that's what we have. You have modern versions of inhabiting one's being. A cell phone is a perfect example. The obsession. And we have a physical evidence of this. We, of course, have the chemical reactions that are happening, the dopamine that is, they're playing with the levels of a person's biochemistry in the mind, the brain. Serotonin is almost non-existent for many of us. So you're completely reliant on the chemicals they are injecting in the food, especially with children. The amount of sugar that they would put in the food is incredible. I think in the US they recently banned, finally, different types of color chemical. These are poisons. In Europe, these are banned completely, some of them. But all these candies, the cookies, the jelly beans, all these things, you see different colors, we think, oh, so cute, they make it interesting color, And they put different fragrances, this and that, so it sells. The texture. So there is minimization of certain values, and in its place they are introducing something of the opposite nature, which is destructive of the body and definitely destructive of the mind. The concentration has dropped in children and in adults to unprecedented levels. People cannot concentrate. And you always are looking for some type of a gratification outside of yourself. You're never pleased, you're always agitated. So in a sense, today's modern human being is very much at the hands or at the mercy of other beings. In, I think, biblical terms, it would be called possessed. We need to be possessed by mindfulness. Okay? If we're going to be possessed by anything, that should be it. Mindfulness. And it's not somebody else's mindfulness, it's yours. You cannot be possessed by mindfulness that belongs to someone else. Because that's the situation we're in. They just have to say something on the mass media, and everybody buys it. In some parts of the world, more so than others, because there's some people that are waking up, finally. After this whole debacle with COVID and whatnot, people are waking up to reality that they've been duped, they've been fooled, they've allowed themselves to be fooled, they've dropped their humanity. Billions of us did that. We've dropped logic, we've dropped critical thinking. And that's another evidence that we have been possessed by the opposite of wisdom, the opposite of decency. Now, getting back to the possession part by other beings. So long as you are not living a virtuous life, you're always open. It's like having a house being inaccessible by several of its gates and doors, but somehow you've left the back door open or one window open that's accessible. Somebody can jump and they can access inside your house, and so all the other gates technically would become obsolete, unnecessary because they've entered. You've left that part of your life open. So it's like somebody saying, I'm never going to lie and I live a virtuous life because I don't lie, because I don't do this, because I don't eat this type of food, I don't do that, I avoid saying the wrong things, or I avoid cursing or swearing. Okay. But when it comes to that area of your life, you close an eye. Well, that's your back door. You left it open. It's like a ship, a boat that's so well insulated from all sides except for one area that's left completely open. And the water is going to gush through, and the boat is going to be sunk in no time. So it has to be completely protected. That's what we call sila, living with virtue. And in the examples that I am using as a reference in my mind as I'm addressing this question raised, in the suttas you do find like children and other beings that become possessed. They become possessed as a result of an intense moment of anger, an intense moment of completely relinquishing what makes you human, what makes us human, such as harming someone, harming yourself, as I said. So if you have a cutter, somebody who cuts themselves, you're opening yourself. A portal is opened by you. So you quickly close that. Just like you close the wound, you make sure you protect your body because it's sacred. You avoid hurting yourself. Similarly, others. What we have are individuals who go to these events, these modern day, from what sometimes I hear happening in the world more and more openly, is they engage in complete debauchery, complete like Sodom and Gomorrah from the Bible. I remember those stories, and so there's complete craziness, mishmash of things happening, and people just give themselves the freedom to do whatever that comes to mind. Well, whatever comes to mind is a guaranteed way of you no longer being in control. There's no restraint left. When you don't have restraint, that means you're like a very fast car being driven, or in this case, flying uncontrollably without anyone being on the, holding the steering wheel. Anything could happen. And one, thing for sure, good things are not going to happen. There's usually a terrible, terrible devastation if you survive it. You've done already so many things. This is what happens when people go to parties and they drink and they, do so much, drug, and they leave, even if they just get a little bit inebriated or lose their cognitive abilities by even very slightly, they can do some horrific damage. And then they come to their senses and they say, oh my, check any DUI case, driving under the influence cases, where so many people have died and do continue to die as a result of somebody, at least one person, giving themselves the permission to just let their hair down, as they say, and let the wheel take over. No, we have to have a sense of restraint in place. And we start doing that by instilling a sense of responsibility in the child, instilling a sense of responsibility within the household, within the family, and similarly within the social circle. Proper upbringing is what I'm referring to. So that brings a sense of responsibility, yes, but also a sense of decency and joy. That is what we mean by control. So control in the sense that the person's doors and windows are nicely locked. And if the windows are open, they're aware they're open, which ones are open. And you can get fresh air come in. When you open and close the door, go outside, come back in, and welcome guests that you trust. Not somebody just all walking off the street, coming in and just terrorizing the place. No. Joyful life requires responsibility. It's not by accident. If you want to live a happy life, that comes with its own demands, prerequisites. Just like you go and wash your hands when you're about to cook something or when you're about to eat something. You make sure you're clean. So approaching life with that protects you from any outside influences. So in case the person is wondering, well, did the Lord Buddha give any recommendations or remedy? Well, I'm just explaining it to you. But in a nutshell, he would always advise the person to go back to living life with the 5 precepts. Not to kill or harm anyone, including yourself. Number 1. 2, not to take anything that is not freely given to you. Meaning you know that this was given to you. You're allowed to have this, to use this. You know that. They've shown it to you, expressed it to you. You don't surmise it. You don't guess it. You don't infer it. So this means also protecting someone else and their property, as if it's your own. You don't want anyone to come and steal yours. So similarly, you protect someone else's. If there's a wallet on a table, is it yours? No. Why are you taking it? If you're going to take it, you need to give it to someone that, you wait for the person, you might protect it until the person comes. Maybe it's their cell phone, they dropped it, or they forgot at this restaurant or coffee shop. And then you wait, and then they rush back in, they're looking around, they say, oh, this is yours. Or at least give it to the waiter or the barista or somebody if you're going to leave. Instead of just, yeah, it's mine because, hey, I saw it first. Today, the world still unfortunately functions like that. Governments are functioning like that. If I need it, if I want it, I'm going to go get it. That is complete, unethical, illegal, wrong, and terrible way of living, because that will happen to you. You have entire people doing this. Countries of doing this. Countries have come up out of nowhere claiming something that doesn't exist by destroying other people. Well, there's this thing called karma. The Buddha always says, that's the only thing you're going to have. Your karma. Your actions, your intentional, committed actions. Your actions are the only things you will carry with you from life to life. And you will never be able to get rid of it simply because you want to, until you face the consequences of your actions. You will. Even if this life you didn't face any of it. You got scot-free, as they say. You got away. And that's why this life is not the only life. So the pattern of living is very important. You have to fix the pattern of your life now, instead of relying on some future existence of yours to, make amends or fix things. No, because whatever momentum you started, chances are you're going to carry on that tradition of yours. Those tendencies will still be there. And many of time, people will commit the same mistakes again, and now accrue even more damage, more karmic consequences for them to face, because you don't have the memory as to what happened. Many people commit the same things over and over and over and over again. Bad things, bad behaviors, evil actions. And in that particular life, they only think about that event or those occurrences that they recall. That's terrible. Because you have nobody coming in and telling you, hey, this is what you did. But at least in one life, if you realize this, fix this immediately, because the portals are still going to be open from life to life. That's the other thing. That's the other thing. And, if people say, oh, the devil made me do it, or this and that, that's what you had some criminals say over the years, at least in the US, when they were interviewed after they were caught. But they don't think about their own contribution. Why were you listening to the devil, or whatever it is that you're talking about? So, but this happens to be a very small area of living one's life, that is the possession part. It doesn't happen that often. I know some religions are based on that, and that's not Buddhism. Okay, I just wanted to address this because it does come up every once in a while. People are wondering, because we come usually from a Judeo-Christian background, most of us in the West. And we have remnants of stories and things that we've heard, and then things that we hear in the common, people talking about, and then we presume, like, well, at least is it there in Buddhism also? Or Buddhism does not have that categorically. That's not true. Plus, I also remember from the earliest days of my own being extremely a beginner, some decades ago, I remember one of my earliest teachers saying how when he was in Asia, Sri Lanka specifically, he was asked by a layperson to come in along with the other Sangha members, the other monks, to chant, because they were having certain situations happen in the house that were unnatural, such as objects moving without being touched, Um, and apparently they were a couple, newlywed, and the wife was exhibiting unnatural behavior, which was out of character. So the monks went. He happened to be very skeptical, but he went along because, well, it's the laity asking the Sangha to come, the monks, so you have to comply. You're there for a reason, right? As a monk, to help support the laity. So they go and they start chanting, and they hear, all of a sudden they saw the lady of the house start yelling at them. She took on a different persona, as if her voice changed, and she was now cursing at them and yelling at them, saying, "Get out. You don't belong here," because they were chanting the Metta Karaniya Sutta, which is loving kindness chant, discourse. And it's beautiful. All of the suttas, the chants are wonderful. So, and then I think it was him who turned to the lady and said, now addressing that demon or yakha, leave this house, leave this woman, leave this, and we give you loving kindness, oh spirit, oh, Again, most people, especially Westerners who come from a very, quote-unquote empirical, scientific, atheistic, or, secular position, whatever that means these days, because it keeps changing, they might not agree with, they might be rolling their eyes if they're hearing this, survive this talk this much. But it's, the Dhamma is far bigger than what we think it is. And I invite them to go ahead and study the suttas. And no, these were not things necessarily added later, which is the common argument that many of these secular thinkers do to push for their own agendas these days, So, but these things are there, these things do happen, and this was not listed. This story I just mentioned came directly from the source. Somebody who was there, my teacher. And then she left. The being, by the way, left that day. But they went, nevertheless, I think, for the whole week, at least 3 more times, if not every day, for 7 days, to help the environment. Because just like in the case of human beings, that you find deluded people. I did the talk the other day about narcissists, right? Very sadistic, very devious, very evil, basically. Even though they might not think of themselves as being evil, but nevertheless they are. You have a whole range of people. You also have the good people. So in the same way with these spirits, these beings that live on a different dimension, they also, sometimes they don't think of their actions as bad, because they think, I'm just in my home, new home, because now I can have access to 2 worlds, one the spirit world and the other the human world. It's almost like having 2 passports, 2 different citizenships, or 2 languages that you're able to speak fluently. So these are 2 access points. So for the person, it's like it's rightfully theirs, this person. So depending on how long they've spent in that being. Again, the being is not there simply as a victim. We have to get rid of that thinking. Because the being is willfully allowing themselves to continue living in a certain way. That is the problem. You need to close the gates. I mentioned about the first precept, second precept, and third precept is sexual misconduct. Unfortunately, it has gone beyond berserk, like the levels of disgusting behavior when it comes to sexuality and the perversions. That's not enough. They've even gone into like VR, virtual reality world. There's so much money being poured into making people remain addicted to this. Perversions of sexuality in all different ways that it's so shocking. It's so shocking sometimes to hear. But anything that causes harm to someone else, to you, of course, number one, sexually, sensually based, when you're taking someone who belongs to someone else, they are someone else's mate, or a minor, a child, or going against someone's will to impose your sexual desires on. Or you're technically not harming anyone, you think, but you are hurting someone somewhere, such as your own mate, when you're going behind their back and cheating on them. So you see the varieties of this despicable behavior that many of us are engaged in as people. So that's a third, to abstain from such behavior. Fourth is not to speak what is falsehood, to gain something, to promote ill will through your speech, like gossiping, slandering, backbiting, talking trash about someone, trying to divide people that belong together, and talking basic nonsense, or just idle chatter. And lastly is the usage of anything that deludes the mind, meaning it takes away your awareness, your sati. This also includes all kinds of psychedelics. This does not include, however, medicine or medication to relieve pain, like such as when you're going to get surgery done, anesthesia and things like that, or you're going to get a dentist to work on your teeth and it's very painful. So those don't count when you're taking it for that purpose. Or headache medicine because you have excruciating pain. The Buddha was not against that, because it has a purpose for you to not feel suffering, to have something be fixed. The drugs, this, that, the alcohol, and anything that deludes the mind, it could also be large quantities of chocolate, okay, or large amounts of food, even though it's not a drug per se, okay, or sweets, always being addicted to that, or it could also be video games. A lot of people are addicted to it. Guess what? That falls into category of number 5. Okay, this is what we call intoxications. Even if it's one glass. Oh, I'm only drinking one beer. I was like, oh, it's not going to be that bad. It's terrible. And anybody who supports that, they are not talking Dhamma. Unfortunately, we have heard of people in Japan and I think Brazil. Yeah, Brazil. There's some characters who claim to be wearing robes. They're monastics, they claim, and Buddhist monastics that push for these things. They are absolutely not Buddhist, proponents of Buddha's teachings. They don't represent anything that is Buddhist. There's no nobility as far as the Dhamma is concerned, because they are absolute liars and charlatans, period. But again, this is about oneself. So this is the problem is, unfortunately, many people are being led by such characters. So this is where you take charge of your own life, because we're not just being possessed by invisible beings. This is the crucial thing which I want you to take away from this. More often than not, we are being possessed by actual people. The other day's talk on narcissism is what? Is an actual person in your life who's possessing you. That's why they're stripping you from your integrity, from your humanity, making you do things that you don't do normally, because they've created the psychosis in you. They've changed reality. You are starting to doubt. You've begun doubting reality, the truth of what is. And that's what a drug does. So this is, being possessed is another way of being drugged. The media, the news in the world, the narratives, it's so easy to sway people left and right in any way you want them. So humanity has been quite possessed collectively by these outside situations. So my invitation to you, the questioner, is not to think of this only in terms of, or just in terms of, some invisible spirit coming and inhabiting the person, and whether that's possible. I think I answered that. But to go far beyond that, because that happens, incredibly enough, rarely when compared to what has been happening to us, to our humanity. And because it's so hard, it seems, for so many to see the truth, to see what we need to do, each of us, to protect ourselves. And the Lord Buddha's answer was very simple. Sila is number one. Sila, which is virtuous living. To help you with Sila, oftentimes it's difficult. To help you with Sila, Lord Buddha would start with Dana, which is generosity. Because it pulls you out from your own hang-ups, your own rigid, concretized, solidified, rocky ways of thinking. Of me, myself, what's in it for me. And you open yourself in a healthy way to a grander possibility for a happier life for you and others. That's generosity. When you're smiling, when you're giving. And then you start to see how happy you get because of that action you did. It could be something very simple, something financial, whatever you can afford, or helping out someone that you don't technically have to. But you do it nevertheless. You give joy to someone. That makes you feel, wow, strong, powerful. You just put a doorknob on that door that was off the hinges. And now you're building your house, you're protecting yourself. And that's when Sila comes in and you start doing more of the Dana and Sila. And then you say, okay, what's the next step? Okay, well, mind cultivation. Your mind is now seeking to be more and more settled, less and less agitated. Which is, by the way, the agitation part is what happens to a person who's possessed. And that's why I was saying today's human being, any age group, does not know how to concentrate. We do it kicking and screaming, and that only for a few seconds. We can't stay on the same object concentration-wise for even a minute. Why? Because the mind has become so restless. It's like a monkey. But when you're doing this, so you're protecting yourself through generosity, through Sila, and now you're cultivating the mind. It's deepening. And suddenly you start seeing your old ways being wrong. You start seeing, distinguishing. This is what we call discernment, wisdom. This is what we call panya. You get insight after insight. You purify yourself on a daily basis. Guess what? Nothing can penetrate you now. Because you're so incredible. You're happy, you're content, and you're well protected. And who is the author of that protection? You. Nobody else. No being is ever going to come and enter you. I guarantee it. I don't. I mean, the Buddha does. The Dhamma does. And even more so, more importantly so, your own practice does. And that is why the Buddha says, this is a path to be realized by the wise for themselves, by their own efforts. Pachattam veditabbo vinyuhi. This is to be realized by the wise, by their own efforts, for themselves. That protection you can give to yourself. That's the ultimate refuge. That ultimate gift you could give yourself. And that ends suffering. In many cases, you don't even have to see that suffering show up in another life. And the Arahants are those that have ended those other lives completely, done with, completed the journey, the happiest among the happiest. The true rulers, kings upon, kings cannot compare to them. Gods don't even compare to them. That's why the gods always bow to the Arahant. Something to think about. And practice, hopefully. Sukhiyota.